Hi. You're so beautiful. You're welcome. I'm happy to see you. Okay. There are more people alive today than have ever died. It's true. It's crazy, right? That's a thing. You might think that overpopulation and its strain on available resources causes hunger and homelessness. Yet we live in a country where there are 6 vacant homes for every 1 person who is homeless. The problem is not lack of housing. According to Oxfam, 8 people have more money than the bottom half of the entire world's population. 6 of these billionaires from Forbes' list of the world's richest people are American entrepreneurs. Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates, Berkshire Hathaway chairman and CEO Warren Buffett, Amazon founder and CEO Jeff Bezos, Oracle co-founder Larry Ellison, former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, and Facebook founder and CEO Mark Zuckerberg. These 8 men have a net worth of $426 billion. That is more than the bottom half of humanity, which consists of 3.6 billion people. The problem is not lack of money. The cause of homelessness is not lack of resources. It is the uneven and unequal distribution of the world's resources. Hunger Free America analyzed population data from 2015 to 2017 and just released its report that has grim statistics for one of our world's most popular cities. In Philadelphia, the number of people who can't afford enough food increased by 22% in the last 6 years. Some 300,000 people in the city, that's roughly 1 in 5 residents, live in households that the federal government determined to be food insecure. More than 25% of Philadelphians live in poverty, according to the 2017 census figures. How can we use our massive population to solve a massive problem like hunger and homelessness? It starts, I think, with a shift away from the outdated and inefficient systems and solutions and towards what I call a community-first paradigm. My speech will highlight the multiple causes of homelessness, the primacy of community in eradicating hunger and homelessness, and will detail some of my own paradigm shifts. But first, stories. Once upon a time, in the year 2011, at this very university, my students and I set out to open the world's second student-run homeless shelter, modeled after one that existed in Boston. In our first year, we expanded to include students from 8 area universities, as well as students in grades K through 12. The reason we started this project was twofold. One, Philadelphians were experiencing a shortage of shelter beds, and our neighbors were dying on the streets as a result of the shortage. Number 2, I wanted to expose students to people experiencing homelessness so that they would build relationships with these people and be motivated to solve the problem of homelessness. I built college courses on homeless history and prevention and worked with my students to advocate for those living on the streets. When I started this project, I got considerable pushback from Villanova's Office of Risk Management. Their work at the school and the role of risk management at all schools was to find potential risk and avoid it. They were not about to let me move forward with this project, which from their perspective was a liability for Villanova. They explained all the hidden risks of taking Villanova students into the city to run a homeless shelter. They could be assaulted, raped, or worse. By the time the phone call was over, I was beginning to think these students needed this experience more than I ever realized. To me, the greatest risk was not this project, but that they would end up becoming risk management officers. I got another call from campus administration. I was ruffling feathers. It's kind of what I do. This call was from Vice President of Mission and Ministry, Barbara Wall. She explained to me that she was hearing from some administrators that they were concerned about the project. Barbara was in a position to support the endeavor and to assuage the concerns of other administrators, but in order to gain her support, I had to get the blessing of Sister Mary Scullion, a Catholic nun who founded Project Home and was an authority on homelessness in Philadelphia and throughout the country. I didn't know Sister Mary or her work and was daunted by the task. What if she didn't approve my idea? All this work hung on one person's blessing. I went in search of the Holy Grail. I armed myself with as much information as I could gather about her work and homelessness and scheduled a meeting with her. My approach to meetings is to be humble. I knew little about this work, and if I was going to succeed, I first needed to speak with people working in the trenches and on the front lines. I'm not sure how I imagined Sister Mary. Maybe austere, humorless. She couldn't have been farther from these things. This was the first, but not the last time, that working on this project forced me to abandon my stereotypes. Sister Mary had a strong South Philly working class accent and demeanor. She exuded warmth and compassion. And by the time she dropped the F-bomb and referenced Stephen Colbert, I knew she was my new idol. She was enthusiastic about my idea. She had been working in the field for decades and believed that youth needed to provide new and fresh solutions and hope. They did not see homelessness as an inevitable part of our urban landscape. I left that meeting with the Grail in my hand. The fates were sealed a couple weeks later when Sister Mary gave her keynote address at Villanova and to a full audience expressed her excitement over the work the students and faculty were doing to open a student-run shelter in Philadelphia. With Holy Grail in hand, we opened our doors and our hearts the following fall. In our first year of operation, our capacity to love and to give and to hope grew exponentially. With each resident, we learned something new about the world, about each other, about ourselves. Jason was one resident who taught us so much. The first thing I noticed about Jason was his smile. It radiated. When his lips curled up, his eyes sparkled. And when he spoke, his voice sounded like velvet feels. I gravitated towards him. I imagined he must be a volunteer or possibly an outreach worker, visiting our shelter to help our men move into housing. I sat down with him, hoping that he would reveal what he was doing at SREHUP without me having to pry. I was shocked when he explained to me that he was in fact homeless and now a guest at the shelter. He didn't fit the profile. He was too happy, too charismatic, too well-spoken. When I told Jason that I was a history professor, his smile and his eyes grew wide. He loved history, and it soon became evident to me that he knew more history than I did. In fact, the more he spoke, the clearer I was that Jason was the smartest person I'd ever met. He had a degree in law from Yale University and had been working on legal reparations before becoming homeless. He was interested in talking about systems of oppression, economic and racial inequality, and how to have a revolution for peace, justice, and love. He was speaking to my soul. I returned to the shelter nightly to hear his lessons, and his audience quickly expanded. SREHUP volunteers would crowd around him, hoping to learn, to be inspired. His lessons became my course supplements. Weeks passed, and I still didn't understand what Jason was doing homeless. It took me much longer to determine that Jason struggled with mental illness. It must have been easier in bygone years to identify someone with paranoid schizophrenia. An afflicted individual might whisper, "The government is listening to our calls." But now we know that the government is, in fact, invading our privacy, tapping into our phone lines and online and phone correspondence. It becomes harder to differentiate between who is paranoid and who is just well-informed. Because Jason was so well-informed, it took me longer to be assured of his paranoia. It wasn't until Jason explained his theory that the government was responsible for my illnesses and that Pete, our security guard, was responsible for his earphones shorting that I started to understand his paranoia went beyond rationality. During his stay at SREHUP, Jason's social workers had been trying to convince him to take medication, but he resisted their every attempt. He was concerned that psychotropic medication would numb him to the harsh reality of our unjust society, and he did not want to be okay with injustice. I respected the tenacity with which he held to his ideals. His outlook reminded me of the quote by Jiddu Krishnamurti, "It is no measure of health to be well-adjusted to a profoundly sick society." Jason was a genius. His brain was a masterpiece, albeit one riddled with anxiety and righteous anger and indignation. I admired Jason's ability to marry his belief with his lifestyle. In his shadow, I felt like a sellout. What bargains had I made in order to live with a modicum of comfort, knowing this comfort comes on the backs of others? My clothes, my food, my apartment and its furnishings are mostly produced by slave labor. The only way to escape the system is to completely opt out, to sleep on the margins, on the streets, or in a shelter. While I gave Jason props for his honesty and conviction, his social workers were less than thrilled with Jason's resistance to medicate. They explained to me that they didn't want Jason to come back to SREHUP. We had too few beds, and there were too many people who were far more willing than Jason to work with the system to climb out of homelessness. Furthermore, Jason's resistance had actual implications for funding because donors want measurable outcomes. Donors support nonprofits based on success rates, and success to donors depended on our ability to move people from street to housing. Jason was pulling down our success rates. I measured success differently, though. Jason's life had been changed by his stay at SREHUP. In our shelter, he was seen, he was validated, he was loved. And he influenced all volunteers who came to our shelter. He forever changed our lives, and his impact can't be measured. This is a success that can't be scored in any account book. It's harder to measure his kind of success, but it's a success that has far wider implications on the community at large. In the end, we will never know how many people he changed, how many minds he expanded, how many hearts he softened. And so I refused to give up on Jason. SREHUP would have a place for him as long as he wanted a bed with us. Year after year, Jason returned to us in November, seemingly no closer to achieving housing than he was on the first night he stayed with us. We are often impatient. We want immediate results, but results don't work like that. Jason was a study on patience, on sitting with discomfort, on persistence, on practicing the pause, on taking the breath, on trusting intuition, on not giving up on people or on ourselves. Every year when we closed in April, Jason would go back on the streets and wait until November for us to open up again. I would spend the off-season worried about him. We would keep in touch via email, and I would occasionally take him lunch in Love Park. And then on November 11th, 2015, we opened our doors for the 5th shelter season, and there was no Jason. It was the first opening day in SREHUP's history that Jason was not waiting to be let in. I panicked. He wasn't responding to my emails, and I worried that my worst fears had been realized. Something terrible had happened while he was sleeping outside, Had he been arrested while on the streets, sick and hospitalized, or worse, murdered? 2 weeks passed and still no sign of Jason. Every day I emailed Jason. Every day, no response. My worry grew as the days shortened and the night temperatures dropped. It would soon be too cold to sleep out on the streets. With mounting uneasiness, I showed up on Thanksgiving night, weighed down by my shelter offerings of turkey and all the stuffings. And then it happened. The moment that was years in the making. The moment that forever changed my life. As I was carving the turkey, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I pivoted to see a stunning Jason in his tailored shirt and slacks. He came not as a resident, but as a volunteer. In the time since I'd seen him last, Jason had been working, sleeping inside, and taking medication that quieted his inner voices. And here he was to surprise me by volunteering. This was what patience and persistence had gifted us. This is why we practice the pause with each other, with ourselves. When we lose track of the end goal, we start to see the beauty in the process. Jason was one of several residents at our shelter who taught us so much. Students who had started volunteering at the shelter to do good returned regularly and found themselves receiving far more gifts than they ever hoped to give. Momentum grew for our project. Newspapers and radio shows began to cover SREHUP as word spread. Universities and other nonprofits began to reach out to ask me how to be involved. I had tapped into a deep need, a desire people have to be a force for good. College students were tired of being labeled lazy and narcissistic. They were eager to make a difference and were looking for opportunities to do so. At the same time, the Ridge Center Homeless Shelter, the city's largest shelter with over 300 beds, was shuttering its doors for good, leaving many of the city's most vulnerable without indoor shelter during the coldest months of the year. There was so much need, and in my excitement, I wanted to meet the need. This is how SREHUP ended up hosting 3 homeless shelters in our first year of operation. One shelter served LGBTQ youth, arguably the most vulnerable amongst the homeless population. 40% of homeless youth are LGBTQ, and once homeless, are much more likely to commit suicide. The second shelter was for transitional or episodically homeless individuals. This population makes up the largest segment of the homeless population. These people are often hidden from public view. They are in shelters or couch surfing or in abandoned cars or buildings. These people are often highly functional. Many have jobs. They don't fit the stereotype of those experiencing homelessness. But with the rising cost of housing, they cannot afford rent. Our third shelter served individuals who are chronically homeless, defined as an individual with a disabling condition, like substance abuse, serious mental illness, developmental disability, or chronic physical illness, who has either been continuously homeless for a year or more, or who has had at least 4 episodes of homelessness in the past 3 years. People who are chronically homeless consume a majority of the system's resources and are the public face of homelessness, despite the fact that they are only 18% of the total homeless population. Homelessness is a growing problem in the United States. It has not always existed to this extent, and it does not exist in all places of the globe. Therefore, we know homelessness is not inevitable. We do not have to accept this as a necessary evil. In the United States today, many Americans are living on the edge, forced to choose between basic necessities like purchasing food, paying rent, or going to the doctor. 43.1 million. That is the number of Americans who live below the poverty line. 549,000, the number of Americans who are homeless on a typical night. 42 million, the number of Americans who are at risk of suffering from hunger. 1 in 5 children in the US live in poverty. In Philadelphia alone, about 12,000 people access shelter each year, but people are turned away for various reasons, but most often because the shelters are full to capacity. In the aughts, government enacted policies to mitigate the suffering on the streets. These policies were driven by the 2001 University of Pennsylvania study that compared 5,000 people with mental illness who were homeless and living on the streets of New York with 5,000 people in the same condition who had been provided with housing. The study revealed it is less expensive to give a person an apartment, a case manager, and wraparound services than to allow people to live and die on the streets. The study triggered a series of policy changes that shifted funding and support away from shelter and transitional housing. This is known as the linear approach, and towards rapid rehousing. Rapid rehousing is the term used to refer to the solution of placing homeless individuals and families into housing quickly, usually within 30 days of entering a homeless shelter. This assistance comes in the form of housing vouchers, a rent subsidy that uses government money to partially pay for a share of rent and utilities from landlords. Often this financial assistance is short-term, between 4 and 6 months, which was decided as the time it takes to restabilize people who had been homeless into permanent housing. There are 3 main components of the rapid housing model: housing identification assistance, rent and move-in assistance, and case management and services. The rapid rehousing model, also known as Housing First, is still at the heart of homeless prevention policy throughout the United States today. Since we opened our shelter in 2011, I have had first-hand exposure to the effect this Housing First model has had on our most vulnerable neighbors. While the Housing First model was successful for many, it failed to achieve full housing stability for all its participants and usher in the end of homelessness. The reasons for this are varied. The program does not provide housing for all, but only those considered the most vulnerable. It also pushes people from substandard living into the shelter because it makes the shelter the gateway to accessing the voucher. A HUD study that examined 2,307 families in 12 communities, depending on the rapid rehousing model, reported that rapid rehousing was actually causing more homelessness. This is because the voucher system increases shelter demand, since it is the only avenue to receive a housing voucher. Many people who had been doubled up in rooming homes, which is illegal in most United States cities, as well as people living in substandard living quarters, were pushed into the shelter with the promise of a housing voucher. But the housing vouchers they received did not lead to an end to their homelessness. In fact, recidivism rates climbed. This puts a strain on shelters which are already underfunded and overutilized. The reason for this failure is that rapid rehousing is a short-term fix for a long-term problem, and it locates the problem of homelessness as one main villain: housing costs. But I have worked in the trenches long enough to tell you that homelessness is caused by a diverse array of factors. There is as much diversity within the pathways into homelessness as there is within the homeless community itself. And homeless prevention cannot be a one-size-fits-all solution. Rapid rehousing also leads to a dramatic decrease in the social integration of its clients. In order to grasp the magnitude of this isolation, one has to understand the hidden lives and culture of people experiencing homelessness. We often think of people on the streets as being divorced from the rest of society. But in reality, most people on the streets have developed a web of connections that are responsible for keeping them alive. They have innovative and beautiful networks that only few of us within the non-homeless community have been lucky enough to witness. When we use rapid rehousing as the solution to homelessness without making any concessions for the social integration of people who are receiving the housing, we take a knife and cut through the social ties that have kept people afloat. We substitute a roof for a culture. This can lead to isolation and depression, of particular concern for United States veterans. According to a comprehensive survey by the US Department of Veteran Affairs, veteran suicide rates have climbed by 25% in the decade between 2005 and 2015, when rapid rehousing was popularizing. There has been limited focus in the area of social integration in rapid rehousing voucher recipients, but one 2012 study on social integration in housing chronically homeless adults found that once housed, people experienced decreased support from clergy, friends, and neighbors, and a decrease in volunteerism. Social integration is an important element of mental health, and housing individuals without considering their mental health leads to poor outcomes and increased homeless recidivism, as well as poor quality of life. If we want to solve the problem of homelessness, we can't just rapidly rehouse our way out of it. We must care for people holistically and put community at the forefront of any solution. Rather than a housing first model, I am advocating a community first model, with social integration as one of the main components of homeless eradication. Social integration is necessary in all our lives, and it is one of the key factors in keeping someone from returning to homelessness. One homeless prevention measure is to adjust the zoning policy. From 1920s to the 1930s, most large cities enacted their own zoning codes, mostly for the benefit of those with power and influence, to the detriment of the poor workforce. Many of these zoning laws are still on the books, and they still have the same effect on the poor as when they were originally crafted. For example, in most cities, zoning outlaws rooming houses, a housing scenario in which multiple unrelated people are living together in the same house. Zoning laws restrict all other housing arrangements other than single-family homes. Standalone homes are more than 60% of housing, but they are by far the most expensive. These homes need their own heating, cooling, plumbing, electrical infrastructure, not to mention their own appliances and furniture. In Philadelphia, Licenses and Inspections Commissioner Dave Perry is working to rewrite Philadelphia's zoning code to allow for rooming and boarding houses in residential neighborhoods, a solution to the affordable housing crisis that is sweeping the nation. In Philadelphia alone, housing prices have spiked by 44% between 2016 and 2017. Along with rising housing costs, poverty is on the increase, as is homelessness. Sharing living space can be a manageable, cost-effective solution to this quandary, and it can eradicate the loneliness from which people within the homeless community suffer. Perry might face significant resistance in City Council to this change, because residents of those properties are often considered transient and poor, but we need to bring our policies closer to our values. And if we really want to work on ending homelessness, we need to get creative. That includes working on policy changes related to homelessness. Perry's policy proposals are important. We should lend him our support so he is not fighting this battle alone. Another important policy change we need to implement is prison abolitionism. Homelessness is closely linked to mass incarceration, which disproportionately affects Black and brown youth. Whole segments of the Black population are locked up for petty drug offenses, the same offenses that their white counterparts commit with impunity. Once incarcerated, inmates often find themselves working as slave labor, making less than 25 cents an hour, producing everything from helmets to license plates. This is essentially slavery through the back door. Please read Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, Brian Stevenson's Just Mercy, and watch 13th, the Netflix documentary, to learn more about this injustice. Another cause of homelessness is the insurmountable cost of health care. We live in a country in which there is no regulation on medical costs, and those who are already in poverty or close to it suffer when they get sick, not just physically, but also financially. I was recently sick and in the hospital. I have a chronic and life-threatening illness, part of which has me battling sepsis and infection of the blood often, and needing a PICC line or permanent IV placed in my arm so I can administer IV antibiotics at home. While in the hospital, my doctors informed me that my insurance plan does not cover home IV infusion of medicine. The insurance company only paid $100 of my $5,000 bill I incurred from my life-saving surgery. My medical debt keeps me in poverty. Our lives should not be like this. One side note, my doctor said he had recently discharged a French patient who got sick while visiting Philadelphia. This patient carried with her the French medical insurance. When her French insurance provider learned she was sick and in the hospital, they flew in a handsome, dapper doctor to assist the American doctors here with her care. Did you hear that? In what world is it fair that I was not born French? They have the best pastries, and they send dapper doctors to care for their sick patients abroad. It's absurd. Mounting healthcare bills is enough to create homelessness, and I have heard many stories of people who have become homeless due to this financial strain. Once disabled, people can apply for medical aid and disability insurance, but it is common practice for people to be turned down once, twice, or even 3 times before their appeal is accepted. There is an entire field of lawyers whose job it is to appeal these cases. This takes time and money, 2 things that people on the brink cannot afford. Opium addiction is also a growing cause of homelessness. In Philadelphia, 1,200 people died of opioid overdoses in 2017 alone, and this year's number has already outpaced last year's death toll. The pharmaceutical industry bears much blame. This trend will only become more dire if the new potent opioid called Suvia is approved by the FDA. Suvia, made by a 13-year-old California-based company, AccelRx Pharmaceuticals, is a powerful opioid that is 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine and stronger than fentanyl. We must fight the drug companies who put profit ahead of people and fuel the opioid epidemic, which leaves homelessness, death, and destruction in its wake. Our underfunded education system is also a contributing cause of homelessness, especially in the city, where the school-to-prison pipeline trains more students to enter prison than college. Schools are so badly funded in Philadelphia that there is 1 guidance counselor for every 471 students. Philadelphia has a grand total of 284 counselors, but there are 351 police officers. The majority of students in the Philadelphia district have parents or guardians who did not attend college. Therefore, guidance counselors should be the entry into college and out of crushing poverty. But with far too many students on their rosters, guidance counselors are overworked and unable to provide adequate college counseling for students most in need. But it would be overstating things to suggest that education is all to blame. There are some people who have multiple advanced degrees and still make poverty wages. Myself, for example. I am one of the 76.4% of all college professors with advanced degrees, plural, who make poverty wages. We need to talk about labor. We've been sold a bag of goods with the dictum, do what you love what you do. I adore what I do. It gives my life meaning and purpose, and I'm good at it. But purpose doesn't pay my bills, and neither does my salary. Lack of livable wages is a major cause of homelessness, affecting people in the gig economy, in academia, as well as in the service and care industries. Care workers, an industry predominated by women whose job it is to work with the sick, disabled, and elderly, provide the equivalent of 26% of the GDP in the United States, but they have the median income for this work is only $7.25 to $10 an hour. Lack of a living wage is an issue that needs to be addressed here at Villanova and throughout the country. There are students at this very school who are homeless. Many of them are here on athletic scholarship, and under NCAA rules, cannot accept funding from the school. But if they were homeless prior to admission, they become homeless again when the school shuts down during winter break. One student, Patrick Williams, was on the Villanova football team. He was a student whose work brought this school revenue, but he ended up hungry and homeless when the school shut down in December. Villanova leaves a residence hall open, but not a cafeteria. Pat was a SREHUP volunteer, and he reached out to me to tell me of his predicament. I called his coach and learned that he was one of several students in the same situation. Every year I get emails from professors here at Villanova asking me if there is space in my shelter for students who have no access to food during the holidays. We have commuter students here at Villanova who can't afford room and board, and when they get desperate, they sleep in the science lab. There are students at this school who cannot afford their necessary course reading material and who cannot afford to take one of the highly touted, unpaid internships this school encourages, nor can they afford formal dress wear for interviews. Villanova has created a food pantry for students, but it is not nearly enough to handle the level of food insecurity some of our students face. We need to address this and fix it systemically so that all of our Villanova students have the ability to succeed. Other contributors to homelessness include domestic violence, inadequate support for mental health and substance abuse challenges, and insufficient support for veterans who suffer war-related physical disability, mental anguish, PTSD, and have difficulty readjusting to civilian life. The good thing with a problem being so pervasive and all-encompassing is there are multiple points of entry to fixing things based on your specific talents and interests. We are all desperately needed to make a change. We must address policy changes if we hope to make a difference for our neighbors. This fight is vital. And I find that we must possess 4 main components in order to take on this work. They are anger, love, kindness, and modesty. Component 1, anger. Benjamin Franklin said, "Justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are." We are often raised on the narrative that anger is uncivilized barbaric. We are to be happy, grateful, and calm. Anger is often portrayed as a wasted and often damaging emotion. I argue the opposite. Anger is necessary to move the world forward. We must feel anger deep in our bones. We must not be content with the suffering around us, even if we don't directly feel the burden. Once we allow ourselves to be enraged, we must act on behalf of this anger to alleviate the suffering we see in the world. I am angry that there are people dying in our country from lack of adequate housing and food. I am angry that we live in a country where children do not have proper resources that all humans need to survive. And this anger keeps me up at night. It also propels me into action. We cannot act for justice unless we have a deep sense of the injustice and anger at the harm being done to the people and our planet. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And indifference is the opposite of revolution, too. Love and hate work in tandem. Both are necessary for reorganizing of people and societies that brings about more peace, more justice, more humanity. The second component is love. I am also propelled forward by the love I have for my community, my fellow neighbors, my planet, myself. We must allow ourselves to cultivate this love, to be fully known, fully actualized. We must extend beyond ourselves. In doing so, we will develop a greater connection to ourselves and the force that connects us all. And if we are to have a people-centered revolution, where we throw off the yoke of power, we must start from a place of love, of reciprocity, of connectivity, where we are called upon to heal and to be healed, motivated by deep, committed, unwavering love for each other. The third component is kindness. Kindness should not be confused with niceness, though. I am kind, but I am not nice. According to Naomi Schulman, nice people made the best Nazis. Or so I have been told, she says. She says, my mother was born in Munich in 1934 and spent her childhood in Nazi Germany, surrounded by nice people who refused to make waves. When things got ugly, the people my mother lived alongside chose not to focus on politics, instead busying themselves with happier things. They were lovely people who turned their heads as their neighbors were dragged away, end quote. I will not sit nicely while others are being deprived of their rights, their freedoms, their dignities. But when exposing others to information they do not have, information that has the power to help them redefine how they look at the world, I must start from a place of kindness and empathy. If I shame students for not having the information, they're less likely to accept new information. They cannot process the new information if they are on the defense, feeling judged, embarrassed, or ignorant. I remember how traumatic it was for me to be challenged for the first time in college. It took so much deep reflection and meditation, but I also had to be slow, deliberate, and kind with my heart and soul in order to come to terms with the new information and worldview. We take risks when entering into a paradigm shift. We risk distancing ourselves from our friends, family, teachers, society, and sometimes from our livelihood. It is much easier to continue to be ignorant and accept old but outdated truths. To encourage our students to move beyond this discomfort, we have to provide them a space of safety in the midst of this risk. Education should be both safe and dangerous. The safety can come when the teacher has true empathy and patience for her student and their learning process. Maya Angelou said, "Forgive yourself for not knowing what you didn't know before you learned it." The same holds true for how we should treat our students. Forgive them also for not knowing what they didn't know before they learned it. and allow them to come to the new understanding in their own time and in their own terms. The final component is modesty. Activism must start from a place of modesty. We must stay curious about the world, each other, ourselves, to allow this work to push past our comfort zone, to disregard conventional wisdom, to believe in what can't be seen and measured. This is when we learn and grow. I will conclude with a story that stirs in me all the anger and the love, and also the kindness and the modesty. We are often taught to fear strangers, especially those who are poor and homeless. Nonetheless, people experiencing homelessness who are strangers to most of us are much more likely to suffer abuse on the streets than be the perpetrators. This was the sad fate of one of the most beautiful men to enter my shelter. From the moment I met John, I knew he was special. He came to us weighed down with books on sign language. He was teaching himself how to sign because he had recently lost his hearing, a result of spending months at ground zero immediately following the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001. John was a first responder of those tragic events. As others fled New York in droves to escape the destruction, John ran towards it, motivated by the need to save the victims from the rubble. It was in the noise and chaos of the rubble that he gained his purpose but lost his hearing. And here he was a few years later, homeless and deaf, trying to regain his footing. At our shelter, John did what John does best, contribute to the greater good. After dinner, John was the first in the kitchen, cleaning dishes and then mopping the floor. He quickly befriended my daughter, Sylvia, and began to teach her sign language. Each night, he would give her lessons in the universal language, and she reveled in her newly acquired skills. Sylvia taught her friends sign language in school and brought her friends to the shelter at night so they could take lessons from John. We all learned and grew with John's lessons. To the outside world, John was a stranger, but to us, he was a friend and a teacher. One night, I showed up at the shelter with Sylvia and her friends in tow, all excited for their sign language lessons, and there was no John. The next night, there was still no John, and I began to worry. It was unlike him to be absent. The worry began to gnaw at me. It grew as the days passed until it became full-blown anxiety. Finally, at the end of the second week, John reappeared, or what was left of him. He stumbled into the shelter, bearing a gash on his forehead. As he crossed the threshold into our shelter, he collapsed on the floor and began to shake rhythmically back and forth. I crawled down to the floor to hold him. As I rocked him in my arms, John explained to me in fits and starts that he had spent the past 2 weeks in the hospital. He was ambulanced there after a crowd of boys threw a brick at his head and stole his backpack. I struggled to hold back tears as he explained that he was suffering brain damage in the attack and was now experiencing frequent seizures. John could hardly get off the floor or form full sentences. He was a shadow of his former self. In the place of vibrant, energetic John was now sick, scared, and lost John. But what had we lost when we let John be treated like garbage? Even before he was attacked, when we allowed this 9/11 first responder, this patriot, this neighbor, this human being, to be treated like refuse, like a stranger in his own land, someone to be considered dangerous, less than, other. What have we lost? And how, if not through fearless compassion, can we ever hope to regain it? The story of my transitional housing program is essentially about relationships, and relationships cannot be quantified. The relationships that develop in our space is indicative of the rich, layered, and often secret culture within the homeless community, and they have been life-saving for those who are the most vulnerable. The stories of the individuals and the relationships in our shelter, they matter. They change our minds. They drive us into the streets, into political office, into the voting booths, into our legislators' offices, into each other's hearts, and closer to ourselves. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'd like now to introduce
Lucy Noland.
Lucy Noland, my partner in crime. She has been working tirelessly on this project with us for over a year and a half now. And as you heard in the introduction to my talk, Lucy is the lead anchor of FOX29. But more importantly, she's an incredible human with an amazing heart, and she is a force of nature. So we are so incredibly grateful and lucky to have her on our team and also have her here tonight. So thank you.
It's a blessing to be here.
Thanks,
guys. We don't have a lot of time, so I'll make this real quick. First of all, what happened to John?
John,
are you curious? I'm curious as to what happened.
John ended up having to go into an assisted living community because he was so sick from his seizures.
All right, so in the fall of 2017, I got a tweet from an organization I had no idea how to pronounce. It's spelled out SREHUP, right? Which I soon found out was SREHUP, which if you listen to the President's Steve show yesterday, they call it Shroot, there it is. But I kind of like that. It's catchy. So of course you know what it is by now. The tweet read, "The first shelter for humans and their pets, let's make this happen." And that obviously grabbed my attention like that. I tweeted back, been trying to get this done for a while now, it's long overdue. Of course, Stephanie sent me that tweet, and that was a while ago. Stephanie, of course, the heart and soul of the organization. She hasn't been able to get rid of me since, so I'm sorry about that. But in the time since, her team, which I am just so humbled and honored to be part of, has made enormous strides. Its mission, of course, as you know, is enormously critical. It seems really simple. You build a place that is not only friendly to people, but if you've got an animal, their best bud, it's friendly to them too. Super simple. This is about not only getting people back on their feet, but as Steph likes to say, it's also about getting pets back on their paws. And if they don't happen to have paws, no problem. If it's legal in the city of Philadelphia, come on in. You can bring your reptile or your bird or your chinchilla or whatever you've got. I've got actually all of that in my house right now. So our project is going to help solve that pervasive and solvable problem that Stephanie is talking about. It's not just about a bed to sleep in. It's also not seasonal. It's 365 days a year. And this, with pardon from my 8th grade teacher, Miss Baker, this ain't no Band-Aid. Our project's going to help solve a number of all these problems. If you know me a little bit, you probably know that I am at Act Philly a lot with this woman over here from Tiny Paws Rescue, and that woman over there for Philadoptables, and this person over here, Claire Morrison, and then Rose DeSalvo, and all you other rescuers that are out there. We got a battle on our hands there. This place has got a big problem when it comes to homeless animals. Every week, it used to be every day, wonderfully beautiful, adoptable, great animals are put down because there's no room at the inn. So, it's heartbreaking to everybody. It's heartbreaking to us. It's heartbreaking to the shelter staff, which works tirelessly to try to get them in the arms of a loving home or rescue. Part of what our project will do, though, is reduce the number of animals who end up at the shelter, which makes more room for other animals, which means fewer animals die. A little story for you that's really representative of the bigger picture. About a year or so ago, Philadelphia plunged into another one of those things called cold blue. It was really, really cold. So among other things, the city tries to get all the people off the streets and into shelters. ASAP. It's all hands on deck. Problem is, in Philadelphia and in cities across the United States, you're not allowed in those shelters if your best bud happens to be an animal. So what do? Well, many folks choose to sleep on the streets because they're not going to give up on the one being that's never given up on them. It's real simple. And all too often, they pay for that love and that dedication and that compassion with their own lives. It happens every year. How many people died on the streets last year?
There were 256.
256. That microphone works, by the way. 256. So the man in our particular story, well, his best friend in the universe, the one being that never left his side, was a dog. And a very well-intentioned person talked the man into giving his dog, which he said would be safe at the city animal shelter, to her while he slept in his own shelter. He was very hesitant, but he did it. Now, here's the thing about our animal shelter here. It's not a doggy daycare. Some people think it is. It is in no way, shape, or form that. So the woman who was trying to help the man and the animal dropped off his best friend. The shelter didn't know the backstory. Back during that time, even if it had known the backstory, not a lot it could have done. The problem is, when she went back to pick up that dog, the shelter was full. So the shelter put down the dog. So when he found out, you can imagine his utter devastation and his guilt, as undeserved as that guilt was. And I am praying that nothing like that ever happens again, especially in our city. We need this project. It's common sense. It's what's right, and it's long, long overdue. So here we go. We are incredibly blessed to have city leaders on board. Leaders like Councilman Swilla and Alan Don and their amazing staff. They get how much Philadelphia needs this, and they have bent over backwards to help. But few things in life are worthwhile that come easily, right? So take what happened last winter. Stephanie's realtor, also named Stephanie, had found a gem of a building. It was big. It had room after room after room after room. All of the rooms were plumbed. It had just everything we could have ever hoped for. The owner was also incredibly motivated to sell. I mean, this place even had space for a rooftop garden. We were dreaming of the garden and a little doggy park and you know, like a workout space and patios. And if you're not a kitty-loving type of patio, is basically an outdoor space for a cat, so they can enjoy the breeze and soak in some sunshine, breathe some fresh air, but not get alone. Now, this place rocked. It wasn't just a home run. It was like a grand slam home run in the freaking World Series. The building was 5001 Frankfurt Street, right next to the L, which is perfect. People can come and go really easily. And it was in a part of town that we thought, they're going to love us. Who's not going to love us? I mean, we're amazing. Our place is a place where we all break bread together, right? Nobody stands on this side, nobody stands on that side. We're going to serve you. We sit down and we eat together. You know, where our resources, whether it's a computer lab or a library, workout sessions, career counseling, medical help for people and the animals, the list goes on. Where all of it is for the entire community, inside our village and outside our village. You know, Coach Jay Wright and his team are going to hold basketball clinics for not just the kids that might be in our village, but for the kids that are in the neighborhood. The Philadelphia Union soccer team, they're on board as well. Now, we also have partners in recovery. We have organizations already pledging to hold food pantries for people and their pets, doctors and veterinarians stepping up to help the neighborhood too, chefs who want to hold classes and teach classes. It goes on and on. So Steph and I and the team hosted a number of tours of this amazing location, and pretty much every single person saw the overwhelming possibility. And now on one particular tour, the head of Philadelphia's Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability joined us, along with folks from Catholic Recovery and councilman and amazing businessman Alan Don and his team, and a bunch of others. By the time we wrapped, just like everyone else, Councilman Don was all in, all in. Outside, he walks up to Stephanie and I, and her realtor, Stephanie, and he said to the realtor, he goes, well, did you tell them? And the realtor said, well, I thought you wanted us to wait. And so Alan, with this gleam in his eye, basically says to Steph and me, you know what? I'm going to buy the building for you. And we were crying. We were literally crying because we couldn't believe it. It was happening, it was real, it was now. But then there was a little bit of a thing. So I'm going to sit down with Steph for a second here because she can kind of talk about the journey. Don't get it, Steph. That was our cue. Was I good? Okay, good. We had to choreograph this ahead of time. So we think this is it. This is going to happen. We thought everybody was going to love us. What happened next?
We got some pushback.
We got a lot of pushback.
We went to a meeting
in Frankfurt
with neighbors, and they had.
Can I say this though? The neighbors that we talked to on the street, as in the everyday people, they loved it.
Yeah.
Everybody we talked to. So these are people that kind of run the neighborhood.
Yes.
Right.
And there was something called NIMBYism. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the term NIMBYism. Okay, so it stands for not in my backyard, which means people who are resistant, and this has gone on in this country for years and years and years, people who are resistant to having social services or shelters in their neighborhood, in their backyard. They think it'll attract more people, undesirables, who they don't want.
Right. So basically, they said they didn't want us there. And in fact, when we were in the meeting, it was an interesting meeting with a lot of emotion, which we weren't prepared for. And I mean, there was, I'm going to just say, there was one point where they asked, well, would people be coming from outside this zip code? I mean, would you allow other people in? And I was thinking, yeah, if it's going to save a life, I don't care what zip code you're in, come on over. So it didn't work out. You were devastated. I think you holed up for a while.
I sent a message to my board of directors right away saying, I don't want to talk. And then I got under the covers. I want to explain, though, that NIMBYism comes in very different forms, and the NIMBYism that was particular to this community, it had a lot of reasons behind it, but one of the concerns we had was that this neighborhood in particular feels that the whole city has dumped its social services in their neighborhood.
But not in a good way,
not in a good way. And they feel that it has increased some problems in their neighborhood. Other communities where there are no social services also have NIMBYism. So really, every community fights this fight in terms of where should this shelter go, where should this rehab facility go.
Yeah, and again, this is not your typical shelter. It's like unlike anything anybody else has seen. I mean, I kind of explained it to you. This is we want to be part of the neighborhood.
Yes.
We want the neighborhood to come on in when we have pizza night. We can all learn how to crochet together. Truly, this is what we're talking about here, and help out with educational classes. So Steph was devastated, but understandably so, because we were so invested. However, I was basically saying to you, because I've been around a few years longer than you, that all things happen for a reason. I truly believe that. And I said something better is around the corner that we cannot even envision right now. Just wait. We just got to wait and be patient, right? And so Alan Dom is what came to us from 5001 Frankfurt. I mean, that's what came to us. We also learned lessons about bridge building with the community. We learned that as well. And so Mark Squilla was like, you know what? I have always wanted you in my district. I want you in my district. So let's make this happen. So you went back to the drawing board and you came up with something spectacular, from a building to...
So in August, I heard about a story of a village of tiny homes, cozy cottages, out in Eugene, Oregon, where people who are homeless come in with their pets and they're offered the services that they need to get back on their feet. And then there they have a tiered system where you go into the first village, people have a discharge plan, they're connected to the services that they need. And once they graduate from that first village, which is approximately a year, they move on to the next village, which is a combination of both home ownership and shallow rent subsidy of rent of these homes. But they still have access to all the services. But it's sort of a stepping stone process, and it's not just about housing. As Lucy said, this ain't no Band-Aid. It's also about providing people the services that they need, everything from mental health care, physical health care, job training, rehab, rehabilitation, whatever it is. But also, the important thing, you want to tell them the name of the village?
Oh, Breaking Bread Village.
The Breaking Bread Village. My volunteers come to me, and I have volunteers all ages. The most beautiful thing about our shelter is the community. And they say, what can I do at this shelter? They think, if you think about working at a shelter, people think, I'm going to serve food. I want to disrupt that idea. Instead of thinking I'm going to go to a shelter and serve food, I want you to think I'm going to go to a shelter and I'm going to sit and break bread together. I'm going to sit and have dinner with somebody. I'm going to form a friendship. I'm going to come back over and over again. And I'm going to crochet with them. I'm going to paint with them. I'm going to grow a community garden with them. So I really want us to see this, and it's always how it's been, as a community enterprise in which we're all in it together. And this city needs it. We as a city, but also as a nation, are so divided. And we've been divided for a long time in terms of socioeconomic status and race and many other things, religion. This is an opportunity for us to put all of that aside and come together as one, and I think we just desperately need that right now. So that's the beauty of it.
And it's happening.
It is.
The thing is, there's a piece of property in Mark's Willis district that is absolutely perfect, that I think will be phenomenal for our little village. And we'll have a community center, and the cottages, I want you to think about the cottages. Some of the stuff that's been out there recently shows something that's equivalent to a doghouse or a shed. That's not what we're talking about here at all, guys. Doghouses are bad for dogs, if you ask me, but that's just me. So this is going to be fully plumbed with electrical. It's going to be, have insulation of all sorts. It's basically going to be a beautiful itty bitty little house that I would be proud to live in. And that's what we're talking about here. So this is what I'd like you to visualize.
Absolutely. So what I learned is that there are cities throughout the country and the world who are doing similar villages. So what I've done in the last year is tour them. So I went to Eugene, Oregon, learned best practices, came back to Philadelphia more excited about how to do this. And then I went to another village out in Scotland. There's one in Edinburgh, and I went there and checked that one out. There's another one in Austin, Texas, and I'm going there the first week in March. So I'm really touring these villages of tiny homes for people and their pets. And I think that it's so innovative, and it's really environmentally friendly, which we really need to be concerned with, especially when we're dealing with climate change. And climate change, as many of you may know, affects people who are in poverty the most. They're the biggest losers and victims of climate change. So this is a project that really is holistic. It's about engaging with our neighbors, saving our neighbors from destruction, saving our pets, and also saving the planet at the same time. And there's so many ways that you can be involved. We really do constantly say this is all hands on deck. So as Lucy said, there's a plot of land that we've been romancing for a while, but there's actually many plots of land out in Philadelphia. The idea is that we're going to scale up, and our first plot of land we're breaking ground on this spring. So we actually have the land. We go to settlement in the middle of April. And then we break ground, and we have builders who come in with prefabricated, panelized houses, and then they train our volunteers, and we have people like you and me getting on a hard hat, kind of Habitat for Humanity style, and building them together. Absolutely, we are partnering with Habitat for Humanity. In addition to that, I mentioned that there's so many vacant homes, and more vacant homes than there are people who are homeless. But I've toured these vacant homes. Many of them are dilapidated, and they're not livable. So another part of our project is going to be rehabbing some of those vacant homes so that when our clients graduate from our system, they can go into those vacant homes for either shallow rent subsidy or home ownership. That's where most of our wealth is in our home ownership. So we want to encourage home ownership. And we're going to be getting mortgages with a bank that is actually our partner bank. So that we can encourage these clients to have home ownership at low income costs. Really kind of the opposite of gentrification. It's helping people in Philadelphia who work in Philadelphia stay in Philadelphia, live there, sustain and thrive there.
And actually help those neighborhoods that are blighted thrive, which is a big deal. And in case you're wondering, the city is on board with this. We've had meetings with city leaders for a while now, and they're excited. In fact, one of the head of city planning was asking us, do you think that we can, kind of grow from this, extrapolate out from this? And we're like, we're 100% we can.
Yeah, so there's other plots of land. There's land right now that we're investigating where we can build many of these villages. But it starts small and we scale up. So the first building, the first house, We're starting in April. So
And
this
it's to give people an idea,
Yeah.
so they can visualize. It's hard to visualize
Yeah.
this unless you go see it, touch it, feel it, smell it.
Yes.
So that's what we're doing.
Yeah. But we're working around the clock and we need your help. So if many of you, I see many familiar faces who are involved in SREHUP. In fact, I see somebody with your SREHUP shirt on, my former student. So I love that. And if you aren't engaged and involved with SREHUP, and I encourage you to be, and come help us in any way that you're interested. Whatever your talent is, you like to bake, come bake with us. We're going to have cooking and baking demonstrations. We're going to harvest our own fruits and vegetables and have a farmer's market on Sundays. So there are just so many ways for you to be involved. But again, as I mentioned, I believe the solution to homelessness has to be community first oriented. And that's the paradigm shift I'm asking for here in this room. I'm asking us to put community first and to see this as more than a homeless shelter, but an opportunity to grow our community by being together holistically.
Yep. Do we have any questions? Diane.
So with the current zoning law that is in place now, can you only put one cozy cottage per property?
Did you hear the question from Diana? Because it was about zoning and such, which is key because we've been dealing with that too.
Yes, this is a good question. So we happen to have the best lawyers in the world on our project. It's Tim Anderson at Pepper Hamilton and Jared Burns at Temple Law. And they are real estate lawyers who are very specialized in zoning, because the zoning is a huge headache, and I now have a PhD in zoning. It's fascinating and very disturbing. But no, we can build multiple homes, but what we're doing is, so the land is sometimes already zoned a certain code, right? And so what we're going for first is the land in the city that is zoned residential. So there's some land, even if there's nothing on the land, that's zoned something else, like business or commercial. So we're going after what you would call the low-hanging fruit first. So the land that is already zoned residential, so we don't have to get a zoning variance to operate there. It just makes everything. But the land that Lucy and I have our heart on, we do need a zoning variance. The point is, so what we're doing is we're starting small with the land that already is zoned appropriately. We're going to build there. That'll make it so much easier for us to get the zoning variances on the land that we really have our eye on. But it is a project that is, again, having an intention of scaling up so that we can do this in various parts. And each plot of land, we want multiple homes, but most importantly, a community center, right? Where we break bread together, which is why we're calling it the Breaking Bread Village, and where we offer services.
Like GED services.
That's right.
Or even counseling and these kinds of things.
Financial literacy,
Exactly.
things like this. So, so that's the intention, but with every great project, right, we have to kind of start small, use it as a model, let people see what we're doing, and collect data and analytics, and scale up. But luckily, as Lucy said, we have the city on our side, the head of city planning.
The city realizes what's been going on isn't working. I mean,
Yeah.
they've said as much, and they really want to figure this one out. So.
We've been lucky. We not only have city on our side, but we've gotten a lot of corporate sponsorship. So the way that we're funding this project is through sponsorship, donor sponsorship, and grants. So we already have some really large ones that will make this project possible, and they're also reoccurring grants that we get every year. So from business donors. So people sometimes ask, is the city funding this? And it's not. Even Alan Dom, who's city council at large, he has invested, but out of his personal account, not city funds.
He's a big real estate guy in town, if you don't know. So it's good to have him on our side because he knows some of the hoops that we need to jump through as well.
Okay.
Do you have any other questions?
That's a great question. So OHS is not going to be our entry level. Yes, we're not. You know, we're not going to be connected with them. That's the Office of Supportive Housing in Philadelphia, and we've never have been. So the way that we've always done intake is through a combination of Project Home has helped us with intake. But in the last year, we've really done intake a lot on our own. I think that was something maybe hard for us to do at first, but over the years we've developed our own outreach system. So I think that we're going to continue that. But again, as I mentioned, we've been visiting these models throughout the country and the world to learn about their intake models. So basically, we're going to be, and partnering with Project Home, but really in charge of our own intake. There is going to be a waiting list. There already is, sadly. That's why we want to do this and scale up and do it as soon as possible, which is why we're working around the clock. But this won't be perfect. This project won't be perfect for everybody. It's not intended to meet the needs of everyone and solve all homelessness. We need to do that. But what is needed is what's called the Continuum of Care. We need multiple solutions because we can't have one solution for all of it. So this is one important solution, but the people who will work best in our shelter are the ones who thrive in community, right? So if people are kind of loners and don't like to be with other people, they probably wouldn't be best for us. So we will take people in. There's a small interview that happens and a little bit of a check to make sure that people are appropriate for us based on what's worked best in other cities.
I don't know the name of your organization or how to get information about you. I can't read the back of the line. Who are you?
So we are called SREHUP, SREHUP. It stands for Student Run Emergency Housing Unit of Philadelphia.
I keep saying the union.
We definitely, yes. There's a website which is SREHUP, SREHUP.org.
Or the Facebook page, if you do Facebook.
Which Facebook would just be facebook.com/SREHUP. But if you just Google SREHUP, and my email is just my name, Stephanie.Sena at Villanova. Yeah. STEPHANIE.Sena, SENA at villanova.edu.
Are you a Villanova Prof?
I am.
Are you tenure track?
No, I'm not.
Are you?
That's why the poverty thing.
Yes,
You are?
I am.
And you've been around here since
2003.
you haven't advanced from that stuff?
No. Are you hiring?
I'm retired. I have a daughter-in-law who are adjuncts, and it's a very bad life.
It is a very bad life. It's a shame that I adore my students as much as I do.
Why hasn't Villanova hired you because of your good work with the homeless?
That's a very good question.
Perhaps we should pose that question. The powers that be.
Yes. I teach in a department at Villanova called the Center for Peace and Justice with Will behind you. I love that department so much. It's a perfect fit for me. But yeah, I've been teaching there for years, and I think, like, why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free? I've been working for slave wages. No, I have an office in my car. So it's very sad. Well, now, yes, but only just this weekend. I had been living in a one-bedroom apartment with my two children who were right here, and we were sleeping on top of each other. And some of you have been there and have seen it, but it's been hard. But I love it. It gives my life meaning, but its meaning doesn't pay my bills.
I'm a retired philosophy teacher. It seems to me that it's the job of somebody in the administration to take a closer look
Yeah.
at you and
Thank you.
Perhaps some of your staff can reach out to the staff. She'd love that.
figure out value.
I appreciate that. Unfortunately, that's not how capitalism works, right? So, but I would love that if we were valued and our wages were commensurate to what we bring to the university. The university actually, and I love it here, I do love it, and I love my colleagues, but the university published a documentary on my project, and they use it to advertise the school. And when parents come for parent weekend and homecoming, they air it. For years now, they've screened it, and it's an advertisement for Villanova. But they don't.
Many schools, many adjuncts teaching 3, 4, 5 schools.
Yes, that's correct. I also taught at Cheney University, which, by the way, is a public school. It's a historically black college, public school, they haven't had hot water in their dorms in 7 days. Yep, 7 days. I taught there, and I taught in a building where they had no running water and no usable bathrooms in that building at Cheney University. But yes, I have taught at many different universities, as many adjuncts do. It's about a majority of professors are in this situation.
I hear that 70% of American college courses are taught by adjuncts.
That's correct.
It's appalling.
Yes, it is. It is. But people, when they hear I'm a professor, they think I must be very rich. But I'm just rich in love. That's it.
Well, perhaps.
And I can speak to you afterwards, definitely. I'd love to connect with you.
So we can solve homelessness tonight.
And
we can also solve the problem with the abandoned animals at the shelter and get you a new job.
Just like this. I believe it.
It's been a fruitful night. Is there any last questions? We're going to wrap. Okay, real quick. We got 2 minutes left right here.
Well, I'm so excited about this. I can't even tell you. When you bring in animals and people and helping everyone, it's just beyond, I feel it in my heart. So what I'd like to know is how do we get everybody on board with making these homes happen quickly and everybody doing a part of this? How can we spread the word?
That's it. I mean, to me, that's the key step. You've got to spread the word and tell everybody. And if you do social media, put it out on social media. Call your council people. Whatever county. If you're in Philadelphia, call them. Talk to them.
In Delaware County,
Okay.
you know, I volunteer for a lot of rescues.
That's
I
great.
transport for ACT. I mean,
Oh, fabulous. Thank you for what you do.
coming into the city is a trip for me.
Yeah.
But it would be a wonderful trip for me.
I love that. I want you on my team.
Yep.
So let's make sure that we get each other's contact information, because that's what I want. I want people who are passionate and who have like that drive and that energy. And so I'm very excited to have you working on our team.
We have to wrap it up, but there is one last question over here.
Hi. So in each house, you can have between, really, we can have two to four, probably 3 would be good.
And it depends also on the animals, right? So
That's
if you've got
right.
like a big dog, it's going to limit that capacity.
Yeah.
So it kind of just depends on the situation.
Yes, that's correct. And in each village, we would potentially have between 12 to 20, 30 houses. It depends on the size of the land, but multiple of these homes on the same land in the village. Somewhere between like 30, 40 people on each plot of land, something to that effect. It can, yes, families are welcome, yes.
Families as well, because
Yes.
that's a big need.
That's
All right, well,
correct.
Parting word as we.
Yes, I just want to encourage you to all, please spread the word, get involved, as many of you already have, but if you haven't, if you're new to it, I encourage you to do that. I would love to speak to you and reach out to you. So, I'm on email and phone, and I would love to have all of you on my team, because as we've said multiple times, but I'll end it on this, it is all hands on deck, and we want you on this team. So thank you so much. Thank you.